The envelope wasn't there when I left the apartment. I had turned off every light, locked the door behind me, and taken the stairs like always. No packages, no footsteps in the hall. But when I came back, maybe an hour later, maybe more, it was sitting dead center on the piano bench. Plain manila, no name, no return address, just one line, handwritten across the back. You deserve to know. I didn't open it right away. I stood there, key still in my hand, staring like it might combust. Something about it felt wrong. Not dangerous, but deeply, painfully familiar. Laurel used to write like that. Sharp angles, confident strokes. Even the way she made the Y like a hook. I carried it into the kitchen, set it next to the sink, and poured a glass of water. I didn't drink. My mind was racing, but my body was frozen. Because this wasn't the first time something unexplained showed up in my life. First, it was the calls with no voicemail. Then, the gray scarf under the passenger seat that didn't belong to either of us. The lingering perfume that wasn't hers, or so she claimed. But this envelope felt final. Eventually, I opened it. Inside were three things: a flash drive, a photo of Laurel in a hotel lobby with a man I didn't recognize, and a receipt dated 2 weeks ago. 1 king bed, 2 guests, for 2 nights. I didn't sit down. I didn't cry. I didn't even breathe properly. I walked straight to the old laptop we kept in the closet, plugged in the drive, and waited. No folder, just one video file titled with a date I'll never forget. March 19th. It started grainy like security footage. A hotel hallway. Laurel, my wife, laughing as she kissed him outside the door. The same man from the photo. They stumbled inside and the door clicked shut. That was it. No drama, no confrontation, just proof. Undeniable, quiet betrayal. I left that night with no destination. Took the car, left the ring on the piano where the envelope had been. Drove until the sun showed up like it had something to say. And for weeks I stayed gone until she found me. Until she showed up at a diner 3 towns over, sat across from me without ordering anything, and said something I still don't understand. I had to lie. If I hadn't, they would have killed you. And just like that, the story I thought I understood, the one where I'm the abandoned husband, turned into something else entirely. She didn't flinch when I stood up. She just stared at me with those sea glass eyes, her face pale like it hadn't seen sunlight in weeks. The same eyes I used to wake up next to, framed by laughter lines and sleep. Now they looked haunted, older, like something had been erased behind them. I didn't sit back down. What do you mean, they would have killed me? I asked, each word slower than the one before it. Laurel didn't answer right away. She pulled something out of her coat pocket, a folded piece of paper, the corners torn like it had been opened and closed 100 times. She slid it across the diner table like it was radioactive. You need to read this before I explain anything. I didn't touch it. My body didn't trust her, even if my mind wanted to. I was still stuck on that video. The hallway, the kiss, the way she melted into him like I never existed. And now she was sitting in front of me telling me it was somehow to protect me. Felt like a con, but not the kind meant for money. The kind designed to scramble your reality, twisted until you can't tell if the pain in your chest is betrayal or manipulation. She waited, still didn't blink. Eventually, I picked up the paper. My hands were shaking, and I hated that she could see it. It wasn't a letter. It was a bank statement, an account I didn't recognize. Not ours. Her name wasn't on it, but mine was, and it had over $200,000 in it. Deposited in chunks over several months, always in round numbers. Always labeled the same way. Consulting fee, I whispered without thinking. What is this? She leaned forward, her voice hushed. You've been used, Silas. That account, it was opened under your name. I didn't do it, but I found out who did. I stared at her like she'd grown a second face. What are you talking about? Laurel's hand shook as she reached into her purse again, this time pulling out a flash drive identical to the one I found in the envelope. This is the second part. Everything I found, emails, recordings, even a contract. You weren't just a husband. You were a cover. The word landed like a thunderclap in my mind. A cover for what? She looked around the diner like she was worried someone was listening, even though we were alone, except for an old man in the corner booth. Do you remember the trip I took to Napa last year? The one I said was for a work retreat. I nodded. Of course, I remembered. That was when things started feeling off. She came back quieter, paranoid. Almost. I thought she was just tired. I didn't go to Napa, she whispered. I went to a safe house. She paused like she was expecting me to either scream or leave. I did neither. I was too frozen for rage, too shocked to move. Safe house for what, Laurel? She closed her eyes. Because someone, the man in the video, was blackmailing me. He said if I didn't stay close to you, pretend everything was fine, he'd make it look like you were embezzling from a charity you didn't even know you were signed on to. My stomach dropped. That's insane. Is it? She shot back. Check your email. The one you never use, your college account. You've been getting monthly updates from a foundation that doesn't exist. You've donated tens of thousands. I haven't. You have because he has. Suddenly, it wasn't just about her cheating. It was about a game I hadn't even realized I was a pawn in. And her lie, her betrayal. It started to look like the only thing that kept me from walking into something far worse than heartbreak. But I didn't know what to believe anymore. I looked at her, this woman I once trusted with everything, and asked the only thing that made sense in that moment. Why come clean now? And that's when she said it. Because Jace is dead, and they think you're next. I didn't sleep that night, not even for a second. After Laurel left the diner, I sat in the parking lot with the flash drive in one hand and that strange bank statement in the other, the two of them pulsing like twin grenades. The last thing she said before walking out echoed in my skull like a warning siren. Jace is dead, and they think you're next. I wasn't afraid in the traditional sense. I wasn't imagining men in black SUVs or shady figures with earpieces. It wasn't that dramatic. What I felt was something deeper, a growing realization that my life wasn't mine, that someone, somewhere, had been using my name, my digital footprint, and maybe even my trust to do something behind a curtain I never knew existed. I drove back to the tiny apartment I'd been staying in, a one-bedroom above a bowling alley that reeked of shoe polish and stale popcorn. My hands trembled as I opened my old college laptop, the one she said to check. I hadn't used that .edu email account since grad school. I only kept it alive because my Dropbox was linked to it. I reset the password and held my breath. There were messages, dozens of them, spanning months, all from someone named Clark Halbert, a name I didn't recognize. The subject lines were always cheerful, professional. Q1 Donor Impact Report. Thank you. Your pledge is changing lives. Audit cleared. You're a champion. Inside each email were slick newsletters with my name at the top, thanking me for contributions to something called the Emberwell Trust, a foundation dedicated to restoring at-risk communities through housing, mentorship, and civic renewal. Except I had never heard of it, never pledged a dime, never agreed to be listed as a board member. And yet, in the footer of every email, I was listed as a senior co-chair. I clicked the contact info. The foundation's website looked real enough. Beautiful stock photos, testimonials, staff bios. But when I ran a reverse image search on one of the founders, the guy turned out to be a Norwegian stock model. Another photo came back as a woman who hosted travel vlogs. Fake. Fabricated. The whole thing was a front. I opened the flash drive. The second one. There were 6 folders. One of them was titled, For Silas Only. Inside, audio clips, email screenshots, a scanned letter. The voice on the audio was Jace. Smooth, confident, like he'd done this 100 times. He was talking to Laurel, calmly instructing her to make sure I didn't ask questions. That if I started poking around, she should redirect the heat by distracting me emotionally. He used those exact words. Make him believe it's about you. That's all it takes. He'll spiral if he thinks it's a personal betrayal. Hearing it made me sick. All this time, I thought Laurel was the knife in my back. Turns out, she'd been standing between me and something far worse. Maybe she went along with it at first. Maybe she was in deeper than I could grasp. But she was scared. That much was real. Then came the scanned letter. Typed. Signed by Clark Halbert. the man whose emails had been flooding my inbox. But this time it wasn't cheerful. It was cold, legalistic. It referenced breach of containment, exposure protocols, and a line that froze the blood in my arms. Subject SY43 must not be allowed to disengage from the agreed persona prior to dissolution of all third-party interfaces. Subject SY43. That was me. That had to be me. I read it twice, 3 times, trying to decipher it. Agreed persona, third-party interfaces. And then I saw the final file, a video, no title, just a timestamp. It showed a meeting room, grainy footage, probably from a security camera. Jace was in it, sitting across from a man I didn't recognize, older, suited, wearing a blue pin on his lapel. They were arguing. The audio was faint, but at one point, the man leaned in and hissed something sharp. If he walks, we all burn. 10 days after that recording, Jace was dead. I shut the laptop, barely able to breathe. None of this made sense. But one thing was suddenly terrifyingly clear. This wasn't a love story gone wrong. This was a setup, and I was the center of it. And if Laurel was telling the truth, someone out there was still watching. The next morning, I drove to the address listed at the bottom of the Emberwell emails. It was printed right there beneath the smiling faces and donation buttons. Headquarters, 431 West Delmar Avenue, Suite 202, Holston, Pennsylvania, 19381. I wasn't sure what I expected. Maybe a glass building with a slick reception desk and framed awards on the walls. Something corporate, something tangible. But when I pulled into the neighborhood, nothing fit. Delmar Avenue wasn't in a financial district. It wasn't in a plaza or office park. It was in a rundown strip of brick buildings behind an abandoned train station. Half the windows were covered with plywood. A liquor store on the corner had a sign that just read, Elikonthor. As if even the name had given up. Suite 202 didn't exist. The building at 431 West Delmar was real. Sure, but it was boarded up, graffiti-stained, and clearly hadn't been active in years. The front door was sealed with rusted chains. A faded eviction notice hung like a ghost on the glass. I circled the block 3 times. Even checked for back entrances. Nothing. No lights, no movement, just decay. I was about to give up and leave when I noticed something strange. A black SUV parked diagonally across the street. Engine running, windows tinted. It had been there the whole time. I hadn't thought much of it until I realized it wasn't idling anymore. Someone had shut it off. And then the back window rolled down. A man leaned out. Mid-40s, maybe. Clean-shaven, dressed too neatly for this side of town. He looked at me for a long moment before saying calmly, "You shouldn't be here, Silas." My whole body tensed. I hadn't told anyone I was coming. I hadn't texted. I hadn't posted. I hadn't even left my GPS on. There was no reason for anyone, let alone a stranger, to know who I was or where I was parked. "Do I know you?" I asked. He stepped out of the car and closed the door without answering. He didn't look threatening. No weapon, no sudden moves. But something about him felt rehearsed, like every step he took had already been decided long before this moment. "You're looking in the wrong places," he said quietly, stopping a few feet away. "What you think you're chasing is not real. None of this is. You're from Emberwell," I guessed. "No, but I know what it was." Was? Nothing you'd recognize anymore. It's not a foundation. It never was. It was a firewall. A firewall for what? He didn't blink. "People like you." Before I could respond, he reached into his coat. I braced, expecting a gun, but he just pulled out a plain white envelope and handed it to me. "No names, no return address, just like yours," he said. "But this time, don't wait to open it." He got back in the SUV and drove away. No plates, no tire squeal, just vanished into the curve of the road like he'd never been there. I stood in the street, heart pounding, staring at the envelope in my hand. I opened it right there. Inside was a single Polaroid photo, slightly faded, clearly old. It showed me, maybe 22, standing outside a government building I didn't recognize. Clean-shaven, wearing a suit I don't remember owning, smiling. Standing next to me in the photo, Jace. We were shaking hands. But here's the thing. I didn't meet Jace until a year ago. I had never seen that building. And yet there I was, like I had once been someone else, someone deeply involved. There was a date scribbled on the back in blue ink. November 9th, 2011. Initial briefing. Initial briefing for what? I drove home in silence, pulled the photo from my coat again, and stared at it until my vision blurred. That night, I got a call from a number with no caller ID. I didn't answer, but the voicemail came through, and the voice on the other end chilled me to the core. Your name isn't Silas, and if you go any further, you'll remember why. I must have played that voicemail 20 times. Your name isn't Silas. The voice was familiar, but not in a personal way. More like a forgotten song you can hum but don't remember ever hearing. Flat, unemotional, spoken with terrifying confidence. And the second half. And if you go any further, you'll remember why. That part hit like a curse. I didn't sleep again. I didn't shower. I didn't eat. I sat on the edge of the couch, gripping that Polaroid in one hand and my phone in the other, waiting for something, a second call, a knock, anything. Nothing came. At around 3 a.m., I pulled the laptop back out and scanned through the rest of the folders on the flash drive Laurel had given me. Most of the files were fragmented, corrupt, but one opened without issue. A short video clip, grainy like it had been recorded through surveillance glass. In it, I saw myself, but I was younger, my hair was shorter, my posture straighter. I was sitting in a bare room speaking directly to someone just off camera. I said, "My name is not relevant. For this to work, I can't remember anything once it starts. That's the condition. Full memory suppression. Wipe the original threads." The clip cut out right after. I stared at the screen, frozen. There was no fear in that version of me. No confusion, just calm acceptance. I had agreed to forget something, to erase part of myself. Why? What the hell had I been a part of? I started pacing the apartment, grabbing at fragments of memory like loose threads. Were there moments I couldn't account for? Yes. A few months here and there after college, odd gaps in my employment history, strange recurring dreams that had never made sense. I'd written them off for years, but now they were alive again, and worse, they were connected. That same night, Laurel texted me a single sentence. "You need to stop looking." I didn't reply. Instead, I pulled out the receipt that had come with the photo of her and Jace. The hotel's name, the date, the room number. Not to confront her, not anymore, but to check in myself because something about that room felt wrong, and whatever I used to know, I was starting to remember. I checked in under a fake name, paid in cash, no luggage. The concierge didn't ask questions, probably used to people like me. The hotel was expensive but sterile, the kind of place where people disappear for a weekend and pretend they're someone else. It was the same hotel from the photo of Laurel and Jace. Room 618. When the elevator doors opened on the 6th floor, the air felt heavier. Or maybe it was just my chest tightening. I walked down the carpeted hallway slowly, counting door numbers like footsteps towards something I didn't want to know but couldn't walk away from. Room 618 was at the end, across from a fire exit. I slid the key card into the lock. The green light blinked once. Inside, everything was pristine. The bed was made, lights low. A faint scent of lavender still hung in the air like a memory that hadn't finished fading. I stood in the center of the room and waited for a jolt of recognition, a flash of Laurel, of Jace, of me, but nothing came. Then I noticed something odd. The lamp on the nightstand was plugged into the wall, but the cord was twisted deliberately, like someone had unplugged it and shoved it back in quickly, hiding whatever had been there before. I pulled it out and reached behind the stand. Taped to the back of the furniture was a black envelope. No markings, no address, but my hand started shaking the second I touched it. Inside was a single piece of paper, thick, matte, and blank except for a line written in clean block letters. "You chose to forget. If you're reading this, it's starting to unravel." No name, no signature. I sat down on the edge of the bed and read it again. "You chose to forget." That word, chose, kept echoing in my mind, because if that was true, if I had voluntarily erased part of my life, then whatever I had been before all this must have been terrifying. And yet, here I was coming back to it piece by piece. I didn't hear the knock. The man was just suddenly standing in the open doorway as if the lock had never mattered. Clean suit, no expression, holding a folder like it was just another Tuesday. "You were supposed to stop at the diner," he said. I stood up from the bed too fast. "Who the hell are you?" He didn't answer. Instead, he walked into the room like he owned it, glanced at the lamp, then at the envelope in my hand. "You found it too soon," he muttered, almost disappointed. "It was meant for the next cycle." "What cycle?" I asked, barely holding my voice steady. He opened the folder. Inside were photographs, pages of them, all of me. Not just recent ones, old ones, surveillance style, years worth. Me walking to class in college. Me waiting for a bus in 2014. Me holding hands with Laurel outside our apartment before we ever moved in. He laid one photo on the bed. It was me sitting at a metal table, eyes closed, with electrodes on my temple. "You volunteered for compartmentalization," he said, "to protect the integrity of your real identity. Laurel was your anchor." "My anchor?" I snapped. He nodded. "The person used to tether you back after resets. Every operative needs one." She was assigned. Then she stopped following orders. I sat down again, but this time it felt like gravity had shifted. "I don't understand. You're saying my marriage was a setup?" "Only the beginning," he replied. "Eventually, she fell for you. That's when it all collapsed. The boundaries broke. She ran. Jace was meant to bring her in quietly, but he caught feelings, too. That's what happens when you pretend too long." He handed me the last page in the folder. It was a certificate. Project Ashfall. Completion suspended. Subject: SY43. Status: unstable integration. My name wasn't on it because according to them, I wasn't Silas. I sat in the hotel room long after the man left. The folder was still open beside me, the truth staring up like an unfinished map. I wasn't sure what shook me more, the fact that my life had been constructed or the growing sense that I had willingly played along. But through all of it, every crack in the lie, every strange folder, every half-remembered image, one thing stood out. Laurel didn't vanish. She stayed. Even when the structure collapsed, even when her orders ended, she hadn't disappeared like the others. She found me. She warned me. She came back. Not because she was assigned to, because she chose to. I drove back to her that same night. No more chasing ghosts or trying to reconstruct a version of myself I couldn't trust. Whatever Project Ashfall was, I didn't care anymore. I didn't want to live in fragments. I wanted something real. She answered the door in a sweatshirt and bare feet like she hadn't slept either. There was no dramatic music, no gasps, no hugs, just a silence between two people who finally saw each other for what they really were. Not programs, not roles, not secrets, just two people who had lost their way. "You came back," she whispered. "So did you," I said. She stepped aside to let me in. We didn't speak much that night. We didn't have to. We sat on the floor with tea that went cold and watched the sunrise together. Not because everything was fixed, but because we finally stopped lying to ourselves. Weeks passed. The calls stopped. No more letters. No more black cars or blank envelopes. It was like whatever system we'd been part of, whatever game we'd stepped out of, decided to leave us alone. Or maybe it collapsed completely once we stopped playing our roles. Eventually, I changed my name legally. Not to hide, but because for the first time in my life I wanted a name that I chose. Not one that was assigned, not one that came from a folder. I kept Silas. Not because it was who I used to be, but because it became who I wanted to be. Laurel and I didn't go back to pretending. We didn't erase what happened. We moved. We downsized. We let the past sit in boxes we never opened. Some nights we still wake up from dreams that don't belong to us. But in the daylight we live honestly, carefully, presently. And sometimes that's enough.